Welcome back to our series on Bach's Orgelbüchlein. Today we're looking at the chorale for the end of the year. Das alte Jahr, vergangen ist. The old year has passed away. And what a year that seems to have been for Bach. The whole piece is shot through with sighing motifs and with that kind of anguished chromaticism that we elsewhere only find in Durch Adams Fall or in O Mensch bewein. In short, it's one of the very few pieces in Orgelbüchlein that we can describe not just as sad, but as utter desolation. It seems like it must have been a terrible year. The chorale melody is at the top, but heavily decorated this time. The end of each phrase, other than the first and the last, is a crotchet, but as usual I'd recommend that you make that either a quaver and a quaver rest, or a dotted quaver and a semiquaver rest, depending on exactly the tempo you're taking and on the acoustics of the room. And I suggest that, as usual, in order to make it both clearer to listen to and also easier for you to have something to hang on to, some sort of point which tells you when you're going to release the note of the phrase. The lower parts play an accompanying role, and while usually in Orgelbüchlein Bach makes sure that at least one part at any one time has at least a quaver or possibly semiquaver movement, in this case it doesn't. And that kind of stop-start feel just adds to the feeling of weeping or of sadness. So registration, the piece is marked as for 2 manuals and pedals, so the melody line is going to be on a solo stop of some description. This could just be a contrasting 8-foot stop, or it could be perhaps an oboe or something similar. It could be a sesquialtero, which is what I'm intending to use today on this splendid organ in Neubrandenburg. Or it could even be a 4-foot flute and a tremulant or something similar. Lots of things will actually work. So ornaments, as you would expect for a piece like this with a very slow and heavily decorated melodic line, there are plenty of ornaments. There's a couple of mordants, there's one of the so-called accent and mordant ornaments, and the rest are all trills. Some of the trills are marked TR and some of the trills are marked with the trill sign, and it's a little bit unsure exactly what the difference between those is. You'll notice that the ones marked with the trill sign tend to be on shorter note lengths than the ones which are marked with a TR. But Bach isn't in the habit of differentiating in that particular way. What we can say, however, is that there is a very high proportion of the trills which create some sort of a problem in relation to starting on the upper auxiliary. Let's just have a look at these. The first trill in bar 6 is entirely straightforward, as it very naturally begins on the D, which creates a smooth and logical descending line. But all the other trills, without exception, are prefaced by the note above. So let's look at that very first trill. The previous note is a semiquaver F. If we begin the trill then on an F, it means repeating the previous note, which in this context feels clumsy and intrusive. So how do we solve that? Well, you could start the trill on the main note, or you could tie the F over so that you're effectively starting the trill on the upper note without replaying it. And given that there is such a feeling of falling and sighing in this piece, I'm going to do just that and tie the F over. And I'll do the same, in fact, in each case except in bars 6 and 7. The second trill in bar 6 just runs straight on from the first trill, so there's a sort of built-in ambiguity about it. And the trill in bar 7 seems to want to start on the main note. Obviously, it can be argued in all sorts of ways, and I'm not suggesting that my solution here is the only correct solution. You can decide for yourself what you're going to do. But I think that whatever you decide, you can really have absolution for it. So articulation is going to be relatively legato. Ascending and descending chromatic lines can be very slightly marked, so a new identity in a sense for each note. And those sighing phrases will fall very naturally into twos, with something which actually is spelt out very much in the last couple of bars, where Bach writes in slurs over pairs of notes. The tempo is obviously going to be fairly slow. I'm inclined myself to take the tempo from that sighing motif in the last couple of bars. Whatever tempo you find appropriate for that will probably work for the rest of the piece. I've just got one very slight comment to make in general about this piece, which also applies to one or two of the other pieces in Orgelbüchlein, such as Jahr, and that is that when we have a very slow, very sad piece, it's tempting sometimes to try to make something out of it, to point out to the listener, oh, here's an extra sad bit, to play around perhaps rather more than we would usually do with the rhythm, and to put it bluntly, to milk it rather. But doing that creates a kind of parody. We don't need to. Bach has written everything that is needed, and we can play it relatively straight and trust that that will have the effect. And very often playing with understated emotion actually creates something which is far more hard-hitting than if we try to heighten the feeling or to point things out unnecessarily. So I suggest we play it fairly straight and fairly restrained and let the piece speak for itself.